Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Another plug for you guys to join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. If you want the inside scoop on what I'm seeing and hearing at BYU football practices, well, join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group because I come to your phone in a form of a text message mere moments after BYU practice wrapped up. I had notes out to our Locked On Cougars Insider Group, and if you'd like to be a part of it, it's just $5 a month to be a part of the group. But more importantly, you get a 14-day free trial, 2 full weeks before you're charged anything if you want to check it out. Give it a shot. Click the link in the show notes below, whether you're watching and or listening to this, or reach out to us and we'll get you set up with our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, before we go on today's show, I want to talk about a guy who is locked in an official visit with BYU despite being committed to the Oregon State Beavers. That would be Lamarcus Bell. His nickname is Bam, not Bam Bam, just simply Bam. And he plays for Lake Oswego High School up there in Oregon. As I mentioned, he's been committed to Oregon State for quite some time, but he's recently announced he's going to make an official visit to BYU June 19th through the 22nd. That weekend in June might be the most pivotal weekend of the 2026 recruiting cycle for BYU. They're going to have, we're talking the who's who of their 2026 recruiting class there. Brock Harris is expected to officially visit BYU that weekend. As I understand it, maybe a Ryder Lyons could be there. That weekend could be pivotal to BYU's hopes when it comes to their 2026 recruiting class. But why is a guy who's committed to Oregon State looking at BYU? Well, I want to throw this up here, and the nice part is we can throw this up with Huddle and let you guys see a little bit about what I like about Lamarcus Bell as we're talking about him. The thing about it is he ran for, as you mentioned here, you'll see this on the screen, 2,004 rushing yards this past year for his high school. And if you look at his skill set, he is what I like to call the classic BYU prospect at running back. He may not have top-tier speed. He's a 3-star prospect, according to 24/7 Sports. But if you watch him play the game, he is a one-cut downhill runner that BYU has absolutely used to great effect in recent years. Look at guys like Tyler Algier, like Jamal Williams, like Squally Canada. Right now, BYU's got one of them in LJ Martin. They are one cut, get your read, get downhill, and pick up yardage. And while they, may not be that 4.3 sprinter speed, they got a 4.5, and they're an absolute Mack truck / bulldozer coming at the defense. And that's what I love about what Lamarcus Bell could bring to BYU football. Who knows if he's willing to flip from his commitment to the Oregon State Beavers. Oregon State's in his backyard, being from Oregon, but the fact that he's going to visit BYU, he's also scheduled to visit Utah. So it's essentially Oregon State, BYU, or Utah that he's looking at right now. I think BYU would do well to add Bam to their recruiting class. As I said, you look at kind of the archetype or the model that BYU has with their running backs, he fits it to a T. Harvey Unga understands this. He does a great job coaching up BYU's backs. I was at practice yesterday watching guys like LJ Martin. I was watching Sione Moa. I was watching Pokai Haunga. Even guys down the depth chart like a Jovesa Demuni. All of them have a similar style about them, and they understand what they're supposed to do in BYU's offense. And a lot of it is inside zone, outside zone, take one cut, read the blocks, pick a hole, exploit it, and pick up as much yardage as possible. And I know that it sounds way too simplistic, but that's the glory of the zone scheme that BYU operates in, is when you have a running back who can read the defense and read what his offensive line is doing in that split second before they have to hit that hole. It's a thing of beauty when it works out. And that's what I see here from a guy like Lamarcus Bell. I'm watching BYU football practice yesterday, and LJ Martin, Pokai Haunga, and Sione Moa are all 3 different body types, all 3 different type of running backs. But the one thing they all have in common is they've been coached up to do exactly what they're supposed to do on every single play. And it may not work out all the time. There may be a missed block. They maybe have a poor read on one of those given plays. But I can appreciate the fact that BYU knows what they are, knows what they're looking for in recruiting, and goes out there and finds it. As I mentioned, Bam, he looks very much the part. There's actually some highlights here of him coming up on defense as well, and also on special teams. He's a willing contributor, and he has been an absolute force for his high school. I look at Kel Breslin, who just recently enrolled at BYU, coming from Faith Lutheran down there in Nevada as well. Well, watching Kel Breslin, I made the comparison that I saw a lot of Squally Canada in Kel Breslin, where Squally, I think, gets overlooked at how effective he was before he got injured for BYU. And what I loved about Squally is he was a no-nonsense runner. He didn't have top-end speed. He wasn't the biggest back out there, but he was very smart about how he set up his blocks and exploiting them. Kel Breslin, I see that in him as an early enrollee at BYU. Could Lamarcus Bell here be the next in a pretty long line of successful running backs at BYU? TBD, but it's cool to see him officially visiting BYU when he could easily shut it down and said, you know what, I'm a Beaver for life. That easily could have been his mindset. He could have done that. But the fact that he's still talking to BYU, still hearing from BYU's coaches, I would guess that Harvey Unga is leading the charge there. That means that he sees something, or at least he understands something about BYU that may be enticing to him. So we'll see what happens. I'm not ready to say that, hey, watch out, Lamarcus Bell is ready to flip to BYU. I think it's actually far from that right now, because his comments to 24/7 Sports make it very clear that he's still very much locked in with the Beavers. But he's going to come and give BYU the visit. He's going to come. The old college try sounds trite in this circumstance, but he's going to come and see what BYU is all about. And maybe after that visit, he does have that change of heart and decides that Provo is where he wants to be and wants a little further away from home, coming to the state of Utah to play football. But once again, I'm getting back to the point at hand. Lamarcus Bell fits exactly what BYU looks for in their running backs, and I can appreciate the fact that BYU understands who they are, and more importantly, they go out there and try and find the talent to match who they are as well. And that's the fun part about this when it comes to tracking BYU recruiting. I know some of you, it can turn you off. You're like, hey, a lot of these guys going on missions, I'm not going to see them for 2 or 3 years. Well, simply put, talent is the lifeblood of any football program, and now more so than ever, BYU football needs elite talent in their ranks, because it's only going to get tougher from here for BYU to win football games. And knowing who you are, recruiting to who you are, and having very good football players fit in with that, hey, it's the recipe for some pretty good success. And I think, as we talked about earlier on the podcast, a guy like Kalani Sitake understands that better than anybody, having grown up a BYU guy, playing for BYU, and now coaching BYU. He knows what BYU is all about. He's going to espouse what BYU is all about. And a guy like Lamarcus Bam Bell, he might be what BYU needs in this circumstance. So keep an eye on this. The recruiting never stops, and we'll continue to bring stories to you guys as we hear them about BYU players and the recruits that they're chasing out there. And just it's a way to get to know guys before they enroll in Provo. And like I said, maybe a guy like Bam Bell never ends up in Provo, but you'll be a better, smarter Cougar fan at the water cooler by knowing who these guys are. You can casually toss them out when you're talking BYU football. But as always, thank you for your guys' support of the podcast. Talk about it all the time. We want to be your cheat code to sound like the coolest and smartest BYU fan that you know. Well, you know you have this podcast, but I would encourage you, if you don't mind, share it with your family and friends. Let them know what this podcast is all about. It's here for them daily with daily BYU coverage. But as always, once again, I say this all the time, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And once again, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.